Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of Unlost Causes, a podcast dedicated to exploring the forbidden loyalties and forgotten names of literature, history, and philosophy. I am Joshua Humphreys, author of Exquisite Hours, and also the latest comedy novel, King of the Coconut Swamp. Head curator of the New Cavalier Reading Society, and now the host of Unlost Causes. I am in London on my friend's canal boat, horribly hungover and boiling hot in the middle of a London summer. The podcast itself is going to start by going through volume 1 of my Commonplace book. There are 6 volumes of my Commonplace book. I have 2 of them with me here. I don't always have all of them because I live out of a suitcase. That is volume 1 and volume 6. These books themselves deserve their own introduction. They began in around 2009 as a kind of reaction against my really unsatisfying undergraduate history degree. In my second last year of that history degree, I got into several arguments with my lecturers over their small minds, and so I just started skipping classes, and I would go to the library, the university library, start reading, and I would take notes. And after a few months I'd filled up, I think 5 or 6 A4 notebooks with just handwritten quotations, excerpts, 1,000 scribbled out call numbers. As I just began this kind of tangential, I hate the word journey, but it was a tangential journey, discovering all these authors as I went. Eventually those notes got typed up and put into volume 1 of a Commonplace book. And then as I started writing novels, traveling the world writing novels, kept taking notes, and eventually a volume 2 came about, and then from volume 1 and volume 2 I launched the New Cavalier Reading Society because I felt that these books needed to be shared. And since 2017 these books have been the exclusive privilege of members of the New Cavalier Reading Society. They were not available to the general public, but they now are, and you can own volume 1 of my Commonplace book. It is 311 pages of the best that has ever been written, said, or done. 1,400 quotations from 375 separate authors on 320 different subjects. And we're going to go through it now, page by page, quotation by quotation, and I'm going to explain to you the context of the quotations, who wrote them, why, when, and how they relate to everything else, how and why they are what I would call an unlost cause. You can own volume 1 of the Commonplace book by becoming a monthly or annual subscriber to my Substack, through which this podcast, Unlost Causes, is hosted. You can also go to newcavalierreadingsociety.com/commonplace book and order yourself a copy, which comes with a small 5-month subscription, and I will send you a copy, and that subscription will cover then the 5 months it's going to take to go through these 311 pages, quotation by quotation, lost cause by lost cause, turning them all thereby into unlost causes. There is no AI content in this podcast. There will be no advertisements. There is no auto-generated anything. There is only almost 20 years of reading, writing, traveling, taking notes, researching, and writing more. As I said, I am horribly hungover, so this could get a little random, but I set myself a deadline for today to record this, my first ever podcast experience. I've never even listened to a podcast, but I'm gonna make one come hell or high water. Good movie, coincidentally. Completely unscripted. I'm not going to research anything. I'm just going to talk off the cuff, and if there is anything that I need to research, I will mention it in the next episode. And if you have the Commonplace book and you're going through it with me, and there are any quotations that I skip, do send me an email or a direct message, and I will address any questions that you have. No, don't text me if I miss a quotation. Message me if there's a quotation I missed that you would like explained. There we go. Just saved myself something of a DM headache. Let's dive in. The Commonplace book of Joshua Humphreys, volume 1, covers the years 2009 to 2011. The first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages are random notes that I was unable to date. when I composed these books or put them together from the handwritten notes. But then when we get to page 7, I'll explain what's going on there and why there's a gap between page 5 and 7. Introduction on page 0, frontispiece, cartoon of me. The very first quotation, here we go. Page 1. Wonder is the effect of ignorance, by Samuel Johnson. This quotation actually has quite a large implication. Wonder is the effect of ignorance, the implication therefore being that only the ignorant can experience wonder, and therefore you should walk around devoid of wonderment, which seems kind of a joyless existence. So yeah, whenever I see people wondering at anything, I think you ignoramus. Because according to Samuel Johnson, quotation 1, volume 1, page 1, wonder is the effect of ignorance. Then we have Sallust, a 1st century Roman historian. Every man who wishes to rise superior to the lower animals should strive his hardest to avoid living all his days in silent obscurity, like the beasts of the field. Since only a short span of life has been vouchsafed us, we must make ourselves remembered as long as may be by those who come after us. Wealth and beauty can give only a fleeting, perishable fame, but intellectual excellence is a glorious and everlasting possession. That first notion, since only a short span of life has been vouchsafed us, we must make ourselves remembered as long as may be by those who come after us, is, of course, a Greek invention, like everything the Romans had. It was Greek first. It's the idea of kleos aphthiton, unfading glory. It's in the Iliad. Coincidentally, week 1 of my ancient Greece semester is 50% devoted to that concept, and how and why it is so consequential, or is the thread that runs through the entire course of ancient Greek history. Victor Hugo, that's in French, il n'avait plus d'opinion, il avait des sympathies. He no longer had opinions, he had sympathies. I think it's from Les Miserables, the book, not the musical. And I always thought that was an unlost cause. Having sympathies rather than opinions. Everybody has an opinion. It's a much more beautiful idea to only have sympathies. Cicero, 1st century Roman again. Not to know what happened before you were born is to be a child forever. For what is the time of a man, except it be interwoven with that memory of ancient things of a superior age? There is the original, probably not the original, one of the original arguments for the studying of history. If you don't know what happened before you were born, you were a child forever. Then you have the implication, you have the rebuttal that it would be better to be a child forever. You'll find eventually, I'll read a quotation from John Ruskin, that something like the nature of genius is to be a child forever, to preserve the sense of wonder that children have. But according to Samuel Johnson, and the first quotation, wonder is the effect of ignorance. So I don't know who to believe. Sallust again, only a few prefer liberty. The majority seek nothing more than fair masters. There are quotations in here through all 6 volumes that, for me, have moved mountains or changed the course of my life. Quotations that so mold your brain that there is no going back, and that is one of them. Only a few prefer liberty. The majority seek nothing more than fair masters. Because the implication is that to be free, to have liberty, is to have no masters whatsoever, which I started out believing in devotedly, but as the years have gone by and as I have become ancient, I have ceased to believe in it so vehemently. I always think of Bob Dylan. Even the bird is chained to the sky. Ernst Jünger, still on page 1, a period of law and order as long as the one our generation had behind it brought a real craving for the extraordinary. Ernst Jünger was a soldier in the First World War and wrote a book, Storm and Steel, that was kind of the belligerent counterpart to All Quiet on the Western Front. Ernst Jünger, it's safe to say, had a great time during the First World War. So coincidentally did, what's his name with the little mustache? He loved it and spent the rest of his life trying to recreate that camaraderie and that rabid German nationalism. The next page, top of page 2. You may turn the page. Rosa Luxemburg. Freedom is always the freedom of dissenters. Rosa Luxemburg was a communist. She was murdered in 1919 after the Spartacist uprising in Germany by members of the Freikorps, of which I don't know if Hitler was one. Immediately after the war, Hitler was a spy for communists, as a communist. Freikorps soldiers were demobbed Germans, unemployed after the war. Killed Rosa Luxemburg, along with Karl Liebknecht, two communist leaders. Page 2. Lewis Lapham, American. As was true in the early years of the Republic, the country is governed by a commercial oligarchy, and the citizen who cannot afford the luxury of a contrary opinion learns of necessity to dance the beggar's waltz. That is from a documentary called The American Ruling Class, which, as a 20-year-old, appealed to my radical sensibilities. Then Bertrand Russell. I should say from the outset that there are authors in these Commonplace books who appear much more frequently than others, and I do have the analytics because I am a ginormous nerd. I have the analytics here. There are 10 authors who appear more frequently than any others, and on page 2 of volume 1 is Bertrand Russell for the first time. He is the fifth most frequently cited author. Bertrand Russell, author of Principia Mathematica, had to go back in the year 1900. Logic had gone so far that nobody was sure logically that 1 plus 1 still equaled 2, and he had to go back to first principles and prove it. He was a suffragette in the First World War. He got locked up for anti-war activities and lived to protest the Vietnam War and nuclear proliferation. Bertrand Russell, I do a pretty decent Bertrand Russell impersonation. I can't decide whether or not it would be annoying for me to impersonate him all the time, every time a quotation comes up. But what the heck, I'm hungover. It may be that... No, that's not right. Wait, what does his voice sound like? It may be that the present tendencies towards centralization are too strong to be resisted until they have led to disaster, and that, as happened in the 5th century, the whole system must break down, with all the inevitable results of anarchy and poverty, before human beings can acquire that degree of personal freedom without which life loses its savour. And I mean, you've got big ideas in that one. In the 5th century, he's talking about the 5th century AD and the dismemberment of the Western Roman Empire. He's kind of saying that he probably wrote this in the 50s, are at a point now where we can't turn back. We in 2026 are obviously still, and we're on the tail end of that system breaking down, with all the inevitable results of anarchy and poverty, before human beings can acquire that degree of personal freedom without which life loses its savour. And there we have a liberty again. Oh, I should also add, this is not a podcast for people with short attention spans. Or maybe it is, because I am bebopping and scatting all over the place. There are, as well as authors who appear more frequently, there are also subjects that come up more frequently than all the others. And as I have the analytics here, in graphs and timetables, if you're on video on YouTube, you can see the graphs and the tables. Through all the 6 volumes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 subjects come up much more frequently than the others. Number 1 most common subject is writing. I have myself written, I think, 5 comedy novels. I lose count. 5 comedy novels. I've started working on my 6th. I also teach history, so I have written my own ancient Greece semester and a world history, group of world history subjects that you can choose your own, build your own world history semester. I think there's 32 of those subjects now. Over the past 4 years, I've written those. Anyhow, writing is the first subject that appears the most frequently. 254 quotations in the entire Commonplace book, volume 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The second is art and artists. The third is freedom, which is what Bertrand Russell is talking about, and he would have us decide what level or degree of personal freedom do we have to pass for life to lose its savour. This is Eric Hobsbawm, 20th century Marxist historian. The destruction of the past, or rather of the social mechanisms that link one's contemporary experience to that of earlier generations, is one of the most characteristic and eerie phenomena of the late 20th century. Most young men and women at the century's end grow up in a sort of permanent present, lacking any organic relation to the public past of the times they live in. It's a longer quotation, I won't read the whole thing, but if you have the volume you can go through it. He's kind of agreeing with Cicero in a negative way, or saying that we've lapsed from Cicero's state. People no longer know what happened before they were born, and I would argue, I would go even further now, most people don't know what happened before they woke up yesterday. People have failed to construct long-term narratives even within their own lifetime. Most present issues are so angrily debated because nobody is aware of the full length of what's going on or what has happened, as though, whatever issue they're railing about just began the moment the news story about them began, which simply isn't true. Bottom of page 2, Bernard O'Dowd, Australian poet, 19th century. I won't read that. Oh, all right, I've mentioned it now. That culture, joy, and goodliness be the equal right of all, that greed no more shall those oppress who by the wayside fall. That is something like a poem written to a young nation, either on or before 1901, when Australia became a country, and when Australia used to have egalitarian ideals. It no longer does. Page 3, Woody Allen. You can live to be 100. Drop my pen. You can live to be 100 if you give up all the things that make you want to live to be 100. I've always loved that quotation, and every time I think to myself, don't have another beer, I say, oh, come on, Josh, you can live to be 100 if you give up all the things that make you want to live to be 100. And before you know it, I'm doing a podcast hellishly hungover. Then we have Milan Kundera, the 20th century Czech novelist. The struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. That, I think, is from The Unbearable Lightness of Being, but I could be mistaken on that one. My history degree was in totalitarian studies, so I started out under a professor of Nazi Germany, moved to a professor of the Soviet Union, and then ended up under a professor who spoke like the Count from Sesame Street, and who was Slovakian, or Slovak, and an expert on Eastern European communism. So if he were to read that quotation, it would be, the struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. What was his name? Stefan. He spoke like the Count. So yes. My degree was in totalitarian studies, the opposite of a happy degree. It makes you very aware of human misery and of the general misery that attends government intervention in human societies. Patrick Pearse, Irish revolutionary. There are many things more horrible than bloodshed, and slavery is one of them. But you've got to say it with an Irish accent. There are many things more horrible than bloodshed, and slavery is one of them. Next page, page 4, is obviously a story from my Soviet Russia studies. My grandfather, I'll read it. My grandfather grew up in a village where he cultivated the land with his brother and their children. His neighbour, Petya, was a ne'er-do-well who slept on the porch of his ramshackle hut and spent his evenings drinking and beating his miserable wife. Petya would watch in disdain as we sweated in the hot sun building a new barn or brought home a new cow. And during hard times, Petya would appear at our door asking for a handout. In 1929, Petya appeared at my grandfather's door, accompanied by a handful of thugs sporting a military uniform and capped with a red star, and declared, in the name of Soviet power, I order you to hand over all your property and land to the collective. This is why my grandfather hated communism and Soviet power all his life. Suck on that, communism. The next page, page 5, at the very top, is Isaiah Berlin. Berlin was a Latvian exile intellectual. I think he went to Oxford or Cambridge and became a professor of philosophy. This is Isaiah Berlin. The subheading is The Hedgehog and the Fox, because, as he explains, there is a line among the fragments of the Greek poet Archilochos which says, the fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing. There exists, says Berlin, a great chasm between those on one side who relate everything to a single central vision, one system, less or more coherent or articulate in terms of which they understand, think, and feel. A single universal organizing principle in terms of which alone all that they are and say has significance. And, on the other side, those who pursue many ends, often unrelated and contradictory, connected, if at all, only in some de facto way for some psychological or physiological cause related to no moral or aesthetic principle. Without insisting on a rigid classification, we may, without too much fear of contradiction, say that in this sense, Dante belongs to the first category. So that means he relates everything to a single central vision. Obviously his was 13th century Christianity, while Shakespeare belongs to the second. So Shakespeare was a fox and knows many things. Plato, Lucretius, Pascal, Hegel, Dostoevsky, Nietzsche, Ibsen, Proust are, in varying degrees, hedgehogs. One big thing. Herodotus, Aristotle, Montaigne, Erasmus, Molière, Goethe, Pushkin, Balzac, Joyce are foxes. And when I used to do Commonplace book semesters in the New Cavalier Reading Society, I would always have the New Cavaliers, the members, decide for themselves whether they felt they were a hedgehog or a fox. Whether or not you have one single system or a single central vision through which and to which you relate absolutely everything else, or whether, like Shakespeare and Herodotus, you have no system and you kind of flit all over the place. I am a fox in that sense. No central vision, no 13th century Christianity for me. And then, second half of page 5. Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, one of the very first anarchists, 19th century French anarchist. This is an excerpt called What is Government? And if you love government, I would switch this podcast off right now, because this is Pierre-Joseph Proudhon's definition of government. To be governed is to be watched over, inspected, spied on, directed, legislated at, regulated, docketed, indoctrinated, preached at, controlled, assessed, weighed, censored, ordered about by men who have neither the right nor the knowledge nor the virtue. To be governed is to be at every operation, at every transaction, noted, registered, enrolled, taxed, stamped, measured, numbered, assessed, licensed, authorized, admonished, forbidden, reformed, corrected, punished. It is, under the pretext of public utility, and in the name of the general interest, to be placed under contribution, trained, ransomed, exploited, monopolized, extorted, squeezed, mystified, robbed. Then, at the slightest resistance, the first word of complaint, to be repressed, fined, despised, harassed, tracked, abused, clubbed, disarmed, choked, imprisoned, judged, condemned, shot, deported, sacrificed, sold, betrayed, and, to crown all, mocked, ridiculed, outraged, dishonored. That is government. That is its justice. That is its morality. And then we come to page 7. There's a gap on page 6, because that, page 7, is the very first page of the Commonplace book that corresponds directly and visibly to a page of handwritten notes in the original university A4 notebooks. And the very first quotation is from Aldous Huxley. An intellectual is anybody who has found something more interesting than sex. I do not know whether or not I have found anything more interesting than sex, but if you were to give me a multiple choice question, I would probably vote the Commonplace books, my Commonplace books, as up there, or at least compiling them, which probably says more about my sex life than it does about the enthralling nature of the Commonplace books. Aldous Huxley wrote several books of essays, or they've been collected and published. In them, he wrote an essay about which books were the best to take with you traveling, and he mentioned the aphoristic works of Nietzsche, but I think I would then in turn mention his books of essays, because, as you'll see now, he comes up quite frequently, but he was a great kind of, to me, expander, because his essays are so versatile, and he mentions so many other people that I would then, write down a name, look him up, or her, go and read their books, find the specific book that Huxley was talking about. Yes, Aldous Huxley, author of Brave New World. And then, it is so hot in here, I'm dripping with sweat. God damn it. Alrighty, Aldous Huxley. An intellectual is anybody who has found something more interesting than sex. But that's to imply that... well, I think it's to imply that to most people the most interesting thing in the world is sex. Which I'm not entirely sure is true. Oh, everything's about sex, 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 sex. The second quotation on page 7, It's from T.S. Eliot. The effect of daily newspapers on their readers is to affirm them as a complacent, prejudiced, and unthinking mass. There's a real movement in the early 20th century among intellectuals, who coincidentally are anybody who's found anything more interesting than sex, among intellectuals to loathe newspapers. They were a new invention, newspapers. They only came about really in the 1880s, or daily newspapers anyway. And intellectuals, T.S. Eliot, Nietzsche especially, Nietzsche hated them. We'll get to that lower down this page. Hating on newspapers because they were so vulgar. The next quotation is Nietzsche in German, I'll translate it for you as we go, that everybody may learn to read will ruin in the long run, not only writing but also thinking. So that's not only against newspapers in general, but against teaching people how to read them. Nietzsche, I've written an essay about it, The Advent of Modernity, a term that itself was coined by Baudelaire in the middle of the 19th century. Nietzsche hated it. He was right in the middle of it, so did John Ruskin. But universal education, which became a thing in Britain and Germany in the 1870s and 80s, was also decried by intellectuals. They hated the fact that, farmers and factory workers were being taught how to read. And in the words of Nietzsche, that everybody may learn to read will ruin in the long run, not only writing but also thinking. Then another anti-democratic thinker, Ortega y Gasset, was a Spanish intellectual. Being aristocratic, modern art compels the masses to recognize themselves for what they are, the inert matter of the historical process. Which, coincidentally, is one of my favorite insults. If you ever want to really insult somebody without their knowing, call them the inert matter of the historical process. It's very insulting. You, sir, are the inert matter of the historical process. George Orwell is the next one. You can have an affection for a murderer or a sodomite, but you cannot have an affection for a man whose breath stinks. All too true, George Orwell. All too true. Although, I guess you can have an affection for a murderer or a sodomite. I don't know about a combined sodomite and murderer. I am a sodomite and a murderer, and, coincidentally, the inert matter of the historical process. But I brushed my teeth this morning, so you may have an affection for me, according to George Orwell. On to page 8. I am beginning to ramble. David Hume, 18th century Scottish philosopher, empiricist. There is no reason for studying philosophy, except that to certain temperaments it is an agreeable way of passing time. That quotation resounds with me over and over again, because I love reading philosophy, but when you think about it, it has almost no real-world repercussions or uses or applications. And I know when I talk about philosophy to unphilosophical minds, they look at me like I'm wasting their time after having wasted a great deal of my own time. And there's a funny quotation from Slavoj Žižek, the 21st century philosopher, about skiing. So I have a whole philosophy about skiing. What does skiing mean? Well, I'll do it in Žižek's voice. If you know who Slavoj Žižek is, watch this. I have a whole rational theory against skiing. What does skiing mean? It means you go up to go down. Therefore, you should just stay down and read a book. I'll do a few more Žižeks throughout the podcast because his philosophy is an unlost cause. Where are we? William Blake, Evil in War, we'll come back to him. The bottom of page 8, The Accursed Questions. Die verdammten Fragen in German. I can't speak Russian, but I've got written here, Proklatye Voprosi, I don't know how to pronounce it. The Accursed Questions. Woo! Those central and moral questions of which every honest person, in particular every writer, must sooner or later become aware, and then be faced with the choice of either entering the struggle or turning their back upon their fellow people, conscious of their responsibility for what they are doing. Central and moral questions of which every honest person, in particular every writer, must sooner or later become aware. And then you have to decide whether or not to address them or ignore them, knowing that ignoring them is kind of in bad faith or irresponsible. Page 9, the top, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 quotations from Bertrand Russell again. I'll just give you 2. Men are born ignorant, not stupid. They are made stupid by education. That again is, well, not so much a cry for the abolition of universal education, but more for its improvement, because clearly Bertrand Russell thinks that education makes people stupid. Oh, that's a big one. Discuss. The last quotation in that block is, boredom as a factor in human behavior has received, in my opinion, far less attention than it deserves. This comes up again and again, actually, in Volume 1. There's a few quotations relating to World War One, and George Bernard Shaw himself said that nobody will ever know how many soldiers signed up to join the First World War in order to get away from their families. The fact is, people are just bored and will choose bloodshed and murder as an alternative to boredom if it is presented to them. Then halfway down we got Aldous Huxley again railing on education. The only striking effect of having taught everybody to read and write is that the human beings of lowest intelligence are now vocal instead of being dumb as they were in the past. In case you can't tell, a lot of these writers were great snobs. I really think the first kind of 30 pages is an almanac of snobbery. Damn it, that should have been the podcast's name. An almanac of snobbery. But no, it's not all snobbery. Thomas Carlyle. What we become depends on what we read after all the professors have finished with us. The greatest university of all is a collection of books. And with that, I think I will end the first episode of Unlost Causes. We have gone through only 9 pages of Volume 1 of the Commonplace book, and I think it's taken about half an hour. It is so hot on this goddamn houseboat. There is no breeze. The sun is... I'm right in front of a window, so I'm dripping with sweat. I have no fan. I don't like the setup that I have around me. It's kind of claustrophobic. So I'm off the houseboat the week after next, so I will record the second episode then. Thank you for listening to Unlost Causes, a podcast dedicated to exploring the forbidden loyalties and forgotten names of literature, history, and philosophy. I hope that some of the names I mentioned were unfamiliar to you or forgotten, and that you now know a little bit about them, and that you have discovered at least one lost cause and made of it an unlost cause. Oh, I'll finish on the bottom of page 9. Balzac, the novelist. Balzac, Rabelais. Balzac. Empty-headed people are all indiscreet because they have no thoughts that are worth keeping to themselves. That is a lovely idea. Someone who doesn't tell everybody every thought that they have, because some of their thoughts are so precious they want to keep them to themselves. What's on page 10? Oh, Ayn Rand, Aldous Huxley, William F. Buckley, Bertrand Russell, Benjamin Constant, Michael Oakeshott, Alexander Pope, Lord Byron, Ernest Hemingway, Epictetus, Evelyn Waugh, John Milton, Anthony Burgess, Plutarch, G.K. Chesterton, all to come in the next episode of Unlost Causes, going through, page by page, quotation by quotation, the Commonplace book of Joshua Humphreys. If you would like to own Volume 1 of the Commonplace book and to go through these quotations with the book in hand and to see all the ones that I'm skipping and missing, you can do so by becoming a monthly or annual subscriber to my Substack, through which Unlost Causes is hosted. I will then send you a copy. Or you can go to newcavalierreadingsociety.com/commonplace book and order for yourself a Volume 1 of the Commonplace book. And then you can have it in hand as we begin or go on. As we go on going through. There we go. As we go on going through the Commonplace book. 311 pages of the best that has ever been written, said, or done. 1,400 quotations from 300 and however many authors. I should know that off the top of my head. I wrote it down somewhere. Anyhow, lots of authors, lots of subjects, and you can own the book that contains them all, and through which we are going, from now, for the next 5 or so months. Thank you and good night. I am going to wipe my face of this sweat, and then meditate upon Aldous Huxley, whether or not I'm an intellectual, because I find things more interesting than sex. Sex, sex, sex! I'll speak to you next week. Thank you for listening. And or watching. Peace, I'm out of here!